The silence before the storm. The Valkorian sector had become a graveyard of ambitions. Commander Zethare of the Crixian Armada watched from the bridge of his flagship as thousands of vessels maneuvered through the debris field. The battle had raged for 6 standard cycles now, and neither the Crixian forces nor their enemies, the Hegemony Coalition, had gained any meaningful advantage. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of orange and white, their deaths marked only by expanding clouds of superheated gas and twisted metal. Fighter craft darted between capital ships like insects around dying giants, their weapons leaving streaks of colored light across the darkness. Zethare's claws tapped rhythmically against the command console as he studied the tactical display. The planet below, Harvest 9, was worth every life being spent here. Its atmosphere was perfect, its soil rich beyond measure. Agricultural worlds like this could sustain entire star systems, and whoever controlled it would have significant leverage in the galactic trade networks. The Crixians needed it desperately. Their home worlds were overcrowded, their food imports costing more each cycle. The hegemony wanted it just as badly, their corporate interests seeing profit margins that would make shareholders wealthy for generations. A proximity alarm chirped softly. Zethare's second officer, a young female named Syrah, gestured toward one of the display screens. Another wave of hegemony cruisers was pushing through their left flank, their weapons already charging. Zethare gave the order to redirect 3 destroyer squadrons to intercept. The battle continued its brutal rhythm, a dance of death that neither side could afford to lose. In the chaos, no one initially noticed the spatial anomaly forming at the edge of the system. It started as a small distortion, barely registering on long-range sensors. Then it grew, expanding like a tear in the fabric of space itself. Ship captains across both fleets received automated alerts about the incoming mass signature, but most ignored them. Reinforcements arrived constantly in battles of this scale. Another dreadnought or carrier group would simply add to the carnage. Lieutenant Mara Sisk piloted her interceptor through a storm of weapons fire, her targeting computer struggling to track the enemy bomber ahead of her. She was Zenthari, a species known for their exceptional reflexes and spatial awareness. Her 4 eyes could process information faster than most organic beings, giving her an edge in dogfights. Her wingman, a gruff Crixian named Voss, flew in tight formation beside her. They had been fighting together for 2 standard years, long enough to anticipate each other's movements without needing constant communication. The bomber they pursued was damaged, trailing atmosphere from a punctured hull, but it was still heading toward the Crixian carrier group. If it reached its target, the payload it carried could cripple or destroy one of the massive ships. Mara increased throttle, her fighter's engines screaming as she closed the distance. Her weapons locked on, and she fired a sustained burst from her plasma cannons. The shots connected, tearing through the bomber's weakened shields and igniting its fuel reserves. The explosion lit up her cockpit for a brief moment before the craft tumbled away as lifeless debris. Voss congratulated her over the comm channel, but his voice carried an edge of concern. He had noticed the spatial anomaly, and his sensors were now showing something impossible. The mass signature was enormous, far larger than any dreadnought. It was also materializing faster than should have been possible. Standard subspace transitions took time, sometimes hours for the largest vessels. This transition was completing in minutes. Mara adjusted her course, angling her fighter toward a better vantage point. She wanted to see what was arriving. Around her, other pilots were doing the same, drawn by curiosity and concern. The fleets continued their battle, but attention was beginning to shift. Command channels across both sides crackled with questions and speculation. What kind of ship could generate such a massive signature? Which faction did it belong to? Was this a new weapon, something that would tip the balance of the war? The anomaly reached its peak intensity, and then reality seemed to fold in on itself. Space compressed, twisted, and finally released its hold on the incoming vessel. What emerged made every sensor array in the system scream warnings. The ship was colossal, easily dwarfing the largest dreadnoughts present. Its hull was a masterwork of engineering and artistry combined. Where military vessels were typically utilitarian, brutal slabs of armor and weapons, this ship was elegant. Its surface featured intricate patterns etched in gold and silver, sweeping lines that suggested both speed and power. Purple accents highlighted critical systems, creating a color scheme that seemed deliberately chosen to inspire awe. But it was the weaponry that truly caught everyone's attention. The ship bristled with armaments. Massive rail cannon turrets, each barrel large enough to swallow a fighter craft whole, dotted its spine. Point defense laser arrays created geometric patterns across its hull, thousands of emitters ready to eliminate incoming missiles and torpedoes. Shield generators hummed with barely contained energy, visible as a faint shimmer surrounding the vessel. Missile pods the size of small buildings were mounted in clusters along its flanks. This was not just a warship. This was a statement of absolute military superiority. Mara felt her breath catch as she stared at the newcomer. Her sensors were struggling to classify it, unable to match its profile to any known faction database. Voss was equally confused, his typically confident voice reduced to stammering uncertainty. They edged closer, maintaining what they hoped was a safe distance. Other fighters and small craft were doing the same, forming an impromptu escort of curiosity around the massive vessel. The ship's engines activated with a deep thrumming that Mara could feel through her fighter's hull despite the vacuum of space. The vibration was transmitted through quantum fields, a side effect of the incredibly powerful drive system. Then the ship began to move. It accelerated with frightening speed, its mass seemingly irrelevant to its propulsion systems. Dreadnoughts were slow, ponderous vessels that took time to change velocity or direction. This ship moved like a fighter, responsive and agile, defying every expectation. As it powered through the battlefield, something extraordinary happened. The fighting stopped. Crixian and hegemony vessels alike ceased fire, their weapons falling silent. Fighter squadrons retreated toward their carriers. Bombers abandoned attack runs. Capital ships that had been locked in deadly exchanges drifted apart, creating distance. The entire battle, involving hundreds of thousands of combatants, simply paused. It was as if someone had pressed a cosmic pause button, freezing the conflict in place. The reason was simple and universal. No one wanted to accidentally fire on the unknown vessel. No one wanted to give it a reason to retaliate. The ship's origin was a mystery, but its capabilities were obvious. If it decided to engage, it could annihilate entire fleet groups without significant effort. Both sides understood this instinctively. Survival meant avoiding its attention, becoming as non-threatening as possible, hoping it would pass through the system without interference. Mara found herself mesmerized. She had reduced her speed, matching the giant vessel's velocity as closely as her smaller craft allowed. She was close enough now to see details. The hull plating was seamless, suggesting construction techniques far beyond current galactic standards. The weapons turrets moved smoothly, tracking targets with computer precision. One particularly massive cannon rotated suddenly, its barrel swinging around to point directly at her fighter. Mara's heart nearly stopped. The barrel was large enough to fit her entire craft inside with room to spare. For several terrifying seconds, she was certain she was about to die. Then the turret returned to its original position, the threat implied but not executed. It was a warning. She took it. Increasing the distance between herself and the ship, Mara continued to observe from a safer range. Other craft that had approached too closely received similar warnings. The ship was clearly aware of everything around it, its sensor suite tracking every vessel in the system simultaneously. It was a level of situational awareness that seemed almost impossible, yet it was happening right before her eyes. Then a transmission cut through every active comm channel. The voice was mechanical, translated through universal communication protocols, but the words were clear. Terran vessel entering planetary orbit. All combatants are advised to maintain current positions and cease hostile activities. This system is now under Terran observation. Terran. The word sent shock waves through both fleets. Mara felt her scales ripple with instinctive fear. Every species in the galaxy knew that name, even if most had never encountered them directly. The Terrans were legends, stories told to young cadets about the species that had fought against extinction itself. Centuries ago, they had waged war against an enemy so terrible that entire star systems had been sterilized to stop its spread. The Terrans had brought weapons to that fight that made current military technology look primitive. Planet killers. Star breakers. Devices that could collapse suns or shatter worlds. They had won their war, saved the galaxy from annihilation, and then disappeared. For 800 standard years, they had maintained complete isolation, their borders closed, their ships absent from galactic space. Until now. The weight of history. The Terran warship continued its approach to Harvest 9, cutting through the frozen battlefield like a blade through water. Mara forced herself to breathe normally, her training fighting against the instinctive terror that the ship's presence inspired. Around her, thousands of other pilots were experiencing the same struggle. The comm channels were chaos, voices overlapping as officers tried to restore order, as analysts attempted to understand what was happening, as politicians and admirals demanded information no one possessed. Commander Zethar stood rigidly on his bridge, his scaled hands gripping the command railing hard enough to leave marks. His crew looked to him for guidance, but he had none to offer. The Crixian military had contingency plans for every conceivable scenario. Fleet mutiny. Surprise attacks. First contact with unknown species. But there was no plan for this. No protocol existed for when Terrans suddenly appeared after centuries of silence. The historical records were clear about their capabilities, and equally clear about the consequences of provoking them. He opened a command channel to his fleet. All Crixian vessels, stand down. Weapons to standby mode. Do not, under any circumstances, lock targeting systems on the Terran ship. Maintain defensive postures only. The orders spread through his forces, repeated by squadron commanders and ship captains. Across the system, hegemony forces were issuing similar commands. For once, the two enemy fleets were in complete agreement. The Terran vessel reached planetary orbit and began a slow, methodical scan of the surface. Its sensor beams were visible as faint blue lines sweeping across the atmosphere, mapping everything below with extraordinary detail. Agricultural centers, settlements, military installations, all were catalogued and analyzed. The ship was building a complete picture of what Harvest 9 represented, why it had become the focal point of such devastating conflict. Mara edged her fighter closer to the planet, maintaining her distance from the Terran ship but wanting to see what would happen next. Voss accompanied her, his earlier bravado replaced by cautious professionalism. They had survived 6 days of brutal combat, but neither felt as vulnerable as they did right now. The battle had been dangerous, but it was familiar danger. This was something else entirely. The Terran ship completed its first orbital sweep and began another, this time focusing on the fleets themselves. Its sensors probed every vessel, analyzing weapon systems, shield strengths, crew complements. It was gathering intelligence, building profiles on every faction present. The data collection was thorough and absolutely unstoppable. No ship in the system had the capability to block or interfere with those scans. They could only endure the scrutiny and hope their secrets remained unimportant. On board the hegemony flagship Prophet's Edge, Chancellor Vorn paced nervously. He was Talaxian, a species known for their business acumen and political maneuvering. He had orchestrated this entire military campaign, convinced that securing Harvest 9 would make his political career while enriching his corporate sponsors. Now he faced the very real possibility that Terran intervention would render all his planning meaningless. Or worse, that he would be held accountable for drawing their attention. His military advisor, General Kresh, was monitoring the tactical displays with professional calm. Kresh was a veteran of 40 years of service, having fought in a dozen major campaigns. He had seen terrible things, commanded forces through impossible situations, but even he looked unsettled. "Chancellor, we should prepare a formal communication," he suggested. If the Terrans are here to enforce some kind of judgment, it would be wise to explain our position before they decide our fate. Vorn nodded slowly. It made sense, but what could they possibly say? That they were fighting over a farm world? That thousands had died for the right to grow crops on this particular planet? It sounded absurd when framed that way, though it had seemed perfectly reasonable 6 days ago. War always made sense to those fighting it, but rarely to outside observers. And the Terrans were the ultimate outside observers, species that had transcended the petty resource conflicts that consumed the rest of the galaxy. The Terran ship's orbit stabilized, and it took up a position directly above the planet's main agricultural zone. Its presence there was symbolic, Mara realized. It was positioning itself between the fleets and their prize, making clear that any attempt to attack the surface would mean going through it first. The message was unmistakable. This world was now under Terran protection, regardless of what either fleet wanted. A new transmission broadcast across all frequencies. The same mechanical voice, but this time with more substance. This is Terran naval vessel Indomitable Spirit. We have completed preliminary assessment of the situation in this system. The conflict being waged here represents a violation of the Galactic Preservation Accords, specifically the prohibition against military action near designated agricultural worlds. Both fleets are ordered to withdraw to a minimum distance of 10 astronomical units from Harvest. 9. You have 6 standard hours to comply. Failure to withdraw will be interpreted as hostile intent. The Galactic Preservation Accords. Mara had learned about them in her academy training, though she had never expected them to matter. They were ancient agreements, established nearly 1,000 years ago when the Terrans had still been active in galactic affairs. The Accords covered dozens of situations, from rules about first contact with pre-spaceflight civilizations to protections for unique biospheres. They also prohibited warfare near agricultural worlds, recognizing that such conflicts could devastate food supplies for billions of beings across multiple systems. Everyone had assumed the Accords were effectively dead, relics of a bygone era when Terrans enforced galactic law. Without enforcement, they were just words in historical databases. But apparently, the Terrans had never stopped caring about those agreements. They had been watching, waiting, and now they were back to remind everyone that some rules still mattered. Commander Zethar received urgent messages from his superiors. The Crixian High Command was in emergency session, debating their response. Some argued for compliance, insisting that provoking the Terrans would be suicidal. Others suggested testing their resolve, questioning whether one ship, no matter how impressive, could really force 2 entire fleets to retreat. The debate was heated, but Zethar knew what his decision would be. He had a fleet to protect, and he was not about to gamble with their lives based on political posturing. He issued the withdrawal order. His ships would comply with the Terran demand. The Crixian Armada began a slow, organized retreat from Harvest. 9, maintaining formation discipline even as they pulled back. It was a humiliating moment for Zethar personally. He had fought so hard for this position, lost so many ships and crew members, and now he was abandoning everything because of a single enemy vessel. But humiliation was preferable to annihilation, and he was enough of a realist to recognize which outcome was more likely if he refused. The hegemony forces were slower to respond. Chancellor Vorn was still receiving conflicting guidance from his various stakeholders. Corporate interests wanted him to hold position, to call what they saw as a Terran bluff. Military leadership urged caution. Political allies were divided. The delay stretched from minutes into an hour, and Mara watched with growing dread. The Terrans had given a clear deadline. What would happen if someone missed it? The Indomitable Spirit remained in orbit, its weapons still unpowered but ready. Mara could imagine the targeting solutions being calculated inside that ship, the firing sequences prepared and waiting for authorization. She hoped the hegemony leadership was smarter than they appeared. She hoped they understood that some battles could not be won. Finally, 2 hours into the deadline, the hegemony forces began their withdrawal. It was less organized than the Crixian retreat, some ships moving faster than others, formations breaking apart. But they were complying, and that was what mattered. The Terran ship tracked their movements, its sensors following every vessel as they accelerated away from the planet. Mara realized she needed to leave as well. Her fighter was technically part of the Crixian fleet, though she operated with significant autonomy as a freelance pilot under contract. She turned her craft away from Harvest 9 and began the long flight back to the fleet's new position. As she flew, she kept her sensors locked on the Terran vessel, unable to look away. The ship was broadcasting another message now, this one directed at the planet's surface. Inhabitants of Harvest 9, you are under Terran protection. Defensive measures are in place. Continue normal operations. Trade and commerce may resume once the military forces have fully withdrawn from this system. It was a promise and a warning combined. The farmers and settlers below were safe, but the fleets were not welcome. Voss flew alongside Mara in silence for several minutes before finally speaking. Do you think they'll stay? He asked. The Terrans, I mean. Will they keep a presence here, or will they leave once the crisis is over? Mara considered the question. It was a good one, perhaps the most important question facing the galaxy right now. If the Terrans were returning to active galactic participation, everything would change. Trade routes would shift. Political alliances would be reconsidered. Military buildups would seem foolish when one Terran ship could end any conventional conflict. But if they were only intervening temporarily, if they would disappear again after resolving this situation, then eventually things would return to normal. The fighting would resume, just somewhere else, over something else. I don't know, she admitted. But I hope they stay. We've spent centuries tearing each other apart over resources and territory. Maybe we need someone to remind us there are more important things than conquest. The hours passed slowly. Both fleets withdrew to the specified distance and maintained their positions. Long-range sensors confirmed that the Terran ship remained in orbit, its vigilant watch continuing. Harvest 9 itself began to stir with activity as civilian transports resumed their schedules, bringing in supplies and taking out agricultural products. Life was returning to normal for those on the surface, even as thousands of warships sat idle in the outer system. Commander Zethar filed his official report, knowing it would trigger investigations and political fallout. The Crixian military did not accept defeat easily, and there would be consequences for his decision to withdraw. But he had made the right choice, and he would defend it. General Kresh on the Hegemony flagship was likely facing similar challenges, and Vorn's political career was probably over. They had all been outmaneuvered, not by enemy tactics or superior strategy, but by the sudden appearance of a force they could not possibly challenge. As the 6th hour approached, Mara wondered if the Terrans would make good on their threat if someone had refused to comply. She suspected they would have. The Terrans had not made idle threats during their previous era of galactic presence. When they established boundaries or issued ultimatums, they followed through. It was part of what made them so effective, and so feared. Promises kept, warnings honored, consequences delivered. The indomitable spirit began moving again as the deadline passed. It executed a series of precise orbital maneuvers, settling into a new position that gave it optimal coverage of both the planet and the surrounding space. Its weapons remained unpowered, but its sensors were fully active. The ship was here to stay, at least for now. The message was clear. Harvest 9 was off limits. The war would have to find a new battlefield.